Fellow Disciples by Victor Yap and Doris Mock. Chapter 18. Say what you mean what you say. Luke chapter 22, verses 54 to 62. What would it take for you to change or switch a long-distance telephone company service? Several years ago, telephone companies battled one another for the lucrative long-distance market. Offers included 20% discount on calls to your 12 closest friends, free calling for a month or two, and other gimmicks. In an effort to outdo its competitors, AT&T dangled an expensive carrot stick to attract potential customers by mailing $100 checks to a limited number of customers to persuade them to switch. By cashing the checks, the customers would automatically authorize AT&T to switch their service from other long-distance companies. Without a doubt, the interest was high. Phone calls from customers, publicity from word of mouth, and complaints from rival companies breathed more life into the story. Before too long, the media took note of the unusual method. A Los Angeles daily featured an honest interview with an AT&T spokesman about the promotion strategy. The journalist questioned the spokesman about the company's marketing ploy, to which the AT&T spokesman unabashedly took the opportunity to garner more attention, defend its practice, and slam the critics. He said defiantly, "The real question is, what's your price? Everyone has one." Peter's denial of Jesus was due to a lapse in judgment, a loss of faith, and a fear of arrest. Jesus' last two messages to Peter fell on deaf ears. Once, at the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus warned Peter of negligence, temptation, and weaknesses. "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak." Mark 14:37-38. The last time, Jesus commanded the impulsive Peter, who had sliced off the ear of one of the captors, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" John 18:11. "Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way?" Matthew 26:53-54. Why do people deny Christ? What is our response to threats by our enemies? How does the Lord deal with us when we compromise with the truth? First, identify with Christ in your conduct. Luke chapter 22, verses 54-55. Then, seizing him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance. But when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. Many years ago, a wealthy man went duck hunting with a hired hand named Sam. They took a horse and a carriage, and along the way a rim came off one of the wheels. As Sam hammered it back on, he accidentally hit his finger. Instantly, he let go with some bad words. He quickly fell to his knees, asking God's forgiveness. "Lord, it's so difficult at times to live the Christian life," he prayed. "Sam," said the man, "I know you're a Christian, but tell me why you struggle so. I'm an atheist, and I don't have problems like that." Sam didn't know what to say. Just then, 2 ducks flew overhead. The man raised his gun and 2 shots rang out. "Leave the dead one and go after that wounded bird," he shouted. Sam pointed at the duck that was fluttering desperately to escape and said, "I've got an answer for you now, boss. You said that my Christianity isn't any good because I have to struggle so. Well, I'm the wounded duck, and I struggle to get away from the devil. But boss, you are the dead duck." Do you know believers are not delivered from their flaws, faults, and failings? Those had to be dealt with. Peter, who was so loyal, brave, and outstanding in professing Christ with his lips, failed to confess Christ by his actions. He fell to pieces on his own and by his own doing. Skillfully, persistently, and unceremoniously, Luke dissected Peter's steps and missteps. First, Luke exposed the calculated, premeditated design of Peter's steps. Peter deserted Jesus and fled. Mark 14:50, once Jesus was bound. John 18:12, and though it seemed he returned later, he kept his distance. The Gospels of Matthew and Mark agreed with Luke that Peter was a macrothen, follower because he followed at a distance. Verse 54, Matthew 26:58, and Mark 14:54. There was coldness but no Christ in his following, no affection or aim in his following. It was a rare break from the usual way of following in Luke. Follow him. Luke 5:11, 28, 7:9, 9:11, 18:43, 22:10, 39, 23:27. Follow me. Luke 5:27, 9:23 and 59, 18:22, and follow you. Luke 9:57 and 61, 18:28. To be fair to Peter, he was not the only one standing as far away as possible. All those who knew him, including many women, watched from a distance. Luke 23:49 and Matthew 27:55. However, unlike Peter, the scattered disciples, the ladies, and John 18:15-16, were never questioned before or after the trial. Luke, Matthew 26:58, and Mark 14:54, subject Peter's distance to intense scrutiny. Together, they unanimously and explicitly exposed the hypocrisy of Peter's attitude, behavior, and character. Peter surveyed the grounds, watched his steps, and moved quietly among the crowd. Further, Peter failed to make a difference far or near. When he was inside the courtyard through the hard work of John 18:15-16, his fellowship was with guards, servants, and officials. Verse 55, Matthew 26:58, and John 18:18. Ironically, Peter sat down when he could stand up and be counted. Verse 55, and warmed his body the cold night Jesus was betrayed, arrested, and sentenced. Peter was so preoccupied with himself that he even missed the reason he came, to observe the subsequent trial of Jesus at daybreak before the council of the elders of the people. Luke 22:66-71. Matthew Henry commented, "They that think it dangerous to be in company with Christ's disciples, because thence they may be drawn in to suffer for him, will find it much more dangerous to be in company with his enemies, because there they may be drawn into sin against him." Have you denied Christ by your actions, behavior, or lifestyle? When people look at the way you conduct your life, do they see Christ, his attitude and likeness in you? Second, identify with Christ in your confession. Luke chapter 22, verses 56-59. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, "This man was with him." But he denied it. "Woman, I don't know him," he said. A little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." "Man, I am not," Peter replied. About an hour later, another asserted, "Certainly this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean." Peter replied, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. Peter replied, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. Several years ago, I reread Corrie ten Boom's classic autobiography, The Hiding Place, the amazing story of a Dutch family who was imprisoned for harboring Jews during the Second World War. The first time I read it was about 20 years ago. Corrie, her sister, and her father were sent to concentration camps with Jews and other political prisoners for hiding more than 700 Jews. The arrest of ten Boom's father, in particular, moved me greatly the second time around. The 84-year-old Casper ten Boom marched with other prisoners to the Gestapo headquarters, where he joined a long line of prisoners to have his name, address, and occupation recorded. The chief interrogator who saw the weak and harmless old man had pity on him and queried his officers, "That old man, did he have to be arrested?" Before the officers had time to reply, the chief interrogator shouted at Father ten Boom, "You, old man, I'd like to send you home, old fella. I'll take your word that you won't cause any trouble." Father ten Boom replied weakly, but firmly and calmly, "If I go home today, tomorrow I will open my door again to any man in need who knocks." Casper ten Boom died 10 days later in a hospital corridor and was buried in a pauper's grave, with no one bothering to inform the family. Peter had beautifully pledged his loyalty to Christ. His two declarations were that, 1, "Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will," Matthew 26:33, and 2, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you," Matthew 26:35, or in Luke 22:33, "Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death." Peter, confronted with the same question 3 times, 56 to 60, had changed his story and tune. He had become a great compromiser, a frequent liar, and a huge letdown. Ludwig Gerhard said, "Compromise is the art of dividing a cake so that everybody believes he or she has the biggest piece." Ironically, Peter stumbled not because an inquisitor tortured him. There was no torture in the flesh, only torment in the heart. A lowly servant girl's tenacious interrogation in an informal setting was enough to make Peter squirm. Peter failed the smallest test. No big shots or long swords were around. He was not delivered to synagogues and prisons, or brought before kings and governors on account of his name. Luke 21:12. She came nearer to Peter, verse 56, looked continuously, and checked clearly for herself before making a statement, giving an opinion, and uttering her exclamation, Luke 22:56. Peter could not go hide, remain anonymous, or keep quiet at this point. Matthew, Mark, and Luke's account went straight for the jugular. The 3 accusations, though arranged differently, had similar introductory words. "This man," verse 56, "you also," verse 58, and "certainly this fella," verse 59. Also, Matthew indicated that Peter spoke, articulated, and resonated like a Galilean, Matthew 26:73. Not only could he not cover his tracks, his accent also gave him away. The direct, forceful, and confident Greek prepositions in all the Gospels cut Peter like a knife, pinned him to the wall, and pierced through him like X-ray. This man was with, son, or joint, him, verse 56, and "you also are one of, ek, them. Verse 58, and certainly this fellow was with, or meta, him, for he is a Galilean. Verse 59. In fact, the Greek debut of the verb assert, made by the servant to Peter in verse 59, is derived from the word strong. The challenge was forceful, blatant, and unyielding. The only other time it was used turned the tables around on Peter when the servant girl Rhoda insisted in Acts 12:15 that the escaped Peter was at the door. Note that the three prepositions sun, ek, and meta are arranged in the strong to weak structure, but Peter denied even the simplest ties and links to Jesus. John's account, all in the form of questions, also gave Peter no leeway to fudge. You are not one of his disciples, are you? John 18:17 and 25. And didn't I see you with him in the olive grove? John 18:26. In fact, Peter was spared the tougher preposition for questions, to lose one's life for his sake. Matthew 10:39, Mark 8:35, and Luke 9:24, to stand before governors and kings for his name's sake. Matthew 10:18, Mark 13:9, and Luke 21:12, and to leave houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or wife or children or fields for his sake. Matthew 19:29, Mark 10:29, and Luke 18:29. Peter's answers were sad. The essence of his answers in Greek begin with a negative not, and not the personal pronoun I or the action verb I know, not I know him, woman, Luke 22:57, not I am, Luke 22:58, and not I know what you say, Luke 22:60. Have you confessed Christ and not just professed him? Are you true to your words? Do you testify to him publicly and privately? Share him with people inside and outside the church. Third, identify with Christ in your compassion. Luke chapter 22, verses 61 and 62. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. This old man visits his doctor, and after a thorough examination, the doctor tells him, I have good news and bad news. What would you like to hear first? The patient, well, give me the bad news first. The doctor, you have cancer. I estimate that you have about 2 years left. Patient, that's terrible. In 2 years, my life will be over. What kind of good news could you probably tell me after this? Doctor, you also have Alzheimer's. In about 3 months, you are going to forget everything I told you. The good news for offenders is that the Lord never turns away from us. He turns and looks at you and for you instead, even when we have denied or desert him. The Greek word that described Jesus' look at Peter had a preposition upon attached to the verb, emphasizing a sustained look, a prolonged stare, or a thorough examination. Jesus looked straight, verse 61, into Peter, inside his heart. His gaze transfixed his eyes, read his mind, and penetrated his soul. That was the same word for the way Jesus looked at the rich young man, Mark 10:21. John the Baptist's eyes following Jesus when he passed by, John 1:35-36, and the Galileans staring into the sky at Jesus' ascension, Acts 1:11. King James Version translates the verb look straight as behold, Matthew 19:26, see, Mark 8:25, and gaze, Acts 1:11. Jesus' look devastated Peter. Peter had used his sun, or joint, preposition emphatically to declare his loyal devotion to Jesus. Even if I have to die together, or sun, with you, I will never disown you. Matthew 26:35 and Mark 14:31. But he promptly denied the strongest sun in the first challenge, verse 56, the weaker, or ek, in the second, verse 58, and the weakest, with, or meta, last, verse 59. The to prison and to death, Luke 22, verse 33, assertion of Peter was long forgotten and buried. Jesus' compassionate, tender look into Peter's eyes seemed to say, "Do you remember saying you'd rather die in union with me than disown me?" Peter had failed miserably, though he was asked light questions by a toothless audience in a spontaneous setting. Poor Peter. He earlier denied arneomai, Christ, spontaneously, verse 57, but later he denied ap arneomai, him steadfastly, verse 61. The difference between the two is the addition of the preposition apo, or away or out, to the second denial, verse 61. Conclusion. Sam Peoples Jr. said, "The circumstances of life, the events of life, and the people around me in life do not make me the way I am, but reveal the way I am. Have you denied Christ by your actions and words? Have you practiced what you preach? Do you say one thing and do another? Are you part-time Sunday angel and full-time devil? It has been said, talent gets you to the top, but character keeps you there. Do you have character, or have you contradicted yourself, cheapened the gospel, and compromised with the world?" Bible study questions. 1. Where was Jesus taken? Where was Peter in following Jesus? Verses 54-55. 2. Try to describe the 3 times the process of how Peter was recognized and how he denied the Lord. Use comparison and progression. 3. How did Jesus remind Peter of the fulfillment of his prediction? Verses 60-61. Luke 22:31-34. 4. How did Peter respond after he denied the Lord 3 times? Verse 62. 5. Discuss. 1. After the disciples fled, why did Peter still follow those who arrest Jesus until the high priest's house? 2. Why did Peter not admit that he was with Jesus and his disciples? Why did Peter not leave when someone recognized him? 3. How was Peter's denial of the Lord different from his vow in Luke 22:31-34? 4. Why did Peter cry? What does this mean? Application, small group sharing, and activities. 1. Have you been afraid or unwilling to confess that you are a Christian? What were the circumstances? What did you struggle with? What was the outcome? 2. How should believers seek the help of the Lord and the guidance of the Holy Spirit when faced with a test or challenge? 3. Have you been weak, or have you experienced the pain of falling away from the Lord after you believed in Him? What happened, and how did the Lord help you face your weakness and deal with bearing the consequences of falling away from the Lord? After each study, always encourage members to share one lesson learned about being Jesus' disciple or one act to practice as His disciple.